An elegant woman complains about the bill at an expensive restaurant, saying she was cheated. But in the middle of the discussion, she reveals a secret that changes everything and leaves feeling devastated. Watch until the end, because what happens next will make you rethink the true value of honesty. Like and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. The clock was showing 9:30 at night when the La Vida restaurant, one of the most sophisticated in the city, was beginning to slow down. The yellowish lights reflected on the polished marble, and the discreet sound of the piano filled the room with a silent elegance. But at one of the central tables, the atmosphere was far from calm. Helena Duarte, a woman in her early 40s, blonde, well-dressed, and wearing a pearl necklace that seemed to cost more than the monthly salary of half the employees, stared fixedly at the bill placed in front of her. His face, previously serene, now brimmed with indignation. She let out a mocking laugh and shook her head, summoning the waiter with a snap of her fingers. "Raphael," he said, his voice loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "There's some mistake here, right?" The waiter approached politely with the calm expression of someone who already sensed the problem. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" "Is there a problem?" she repeated, pushing the paper toward him. "I ordered the special of the day and a glass of wine, and you charged me more than that. 200 Rs, that's why." Raphael kept his tone respectful. "Madam, the dish of the day is truffled lobster risotto, and the wine served was the house's special reserve as requested by the lady." Helena raised her eyebrows. "I ordered the house wine, not the house reserve," he retorted, raising his voice. "Either you train your staff poorly, or you enjoy cheating your customers." The entire restaurant fell silent. The cutlery stopped. Even the pianist stopped playing, realizing the weight of the words. Raphael took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. "May I call the manager to clarify, ma'am?" "Call the owner," she interrupted, tapping the table lightly. "I want to speak to the real boss here." In the kitchen, the hubbub began. Some employees exchanged worried glances. Pedro, the manager, heard the call and left quickly. As he approached the table, he found Helena already in full performance. "Ms. Duarte, good evening. Did something happen with the service?" "Something? The service was disastrous," she replied dramatically. "Your waiter served me the wrong food, charged me the wrong amount, and even tried to convince me it was my fault." Pedro looked at Raphael, who kept his gaze fixed on the ground. It was the third time that week they had to deal with an angry customer. But Helena had something different. She had liked of the scandal. "Madam, if the wine wasn't up to par, I can adjust the bill immediately." The manager tried to soothe. "It's not about the wine," she snapped. "It's about the principle. It's about respect for the customer." People at nearby tables whispered. A man whispered to his wife, "This woman seems more concerned with showing off than with the bill." But Helena heard, and that made her raise her voice even more. "This is absurd," she exclaimed. "I frequent much more expensive places than this, and I've never been treated like this." It was at that moment that a firm but calm voice echoed from behind. "And yet it seems that none of these places taught you what education is." The silence was immediate. Everyone turned to look. Augusto Noguera, the restaurant owner, was standing a few meters away, watching the scene from the beginning. Elegant, in a dark suit and with a calm look, he approached with firm steps, while the sound of rain began to fall outside. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm the owner. May I ask what's going on?" Helena crossed her arms. "What's happening is that your employee charged me the wrong amount and was also insolent." "Insolent?" Augusto asked, his tone calm but firm. "Did he insult you in any way?" "No, but his look disrespected me." "The look?" the owner repeated, now with a slight smile at the corner of his lips. "Interesting. Respect for you is in the eyes of others, not in your actions." Helena was speechless. For a brief moment, the air felt heavy. People watched, trying to hide their interest. Augusto continued, "Mrs. Duarte, before making any conclusions, allow me to verify the request." He took the order and looked at it carefully. After a few seconds, he looked up and said, "Everything's fine. But if you want, I'll waive the price of the wine. Not because of the charge, but because of the lack of harmony." Helena looked at him, irritated. Are you implying that I caused a problem? No, he replied firmly. I'm saying it. His words sounded like a dry crack in the air. The hall fell silent. Helena took a deep breath, shaking with anger. Do you know who you're talking to? Yes, I know, Augusto replied calmly. With a client who believes money buys reason. But here, Mrs. Duarte, respect is the only priceless dish. She opened her mouth to respond, but couldn't. Augusto's gaze was serene, yet cutting. And in that instant, Helena felt the ground tremble beneath her feet. Not because of shame, but because of something she couldn't even explain. The discussion ceased, but something had been planted there, a discomfort that would soon turn into discovery. An elegant woman complains about the bill at an expensive restaurant, saying she was cheated, but in the middle of the discussion, she reveals a secret that changes everything, and leaves feeling devastated. Watch until the end, because what happens next will make you rethink the true value of honesty. Like and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. The silence that fell after Augusto's last sentence was so thick that the sound of the rain outside seemed like a distant whisper. Helena remained motionless, as if her own body was caught between pride and discomfort. That phrase, "Respect is the only dish that has no price," echoed inside her in a strange way. But driven more by ego than reason, she took a deep breath and replied, "Are you calling me disrespectful?" "No, ma'am," Augusto replied calmly. "I'm just observing what everyone here has already noticed." Their eyes met. On one hand, the power of arrogance. On the other, the calm firmness of someone who is not intimidated by him. Helena stood up, tapping the table lightly. "I don't need to hear anyone's lecture. I'm in a restaurant, not a morality class." Augusto remained calm. "And yet perhaps this is exactly the lesson you came for." The sentence fell like a bolt of lightning in the hall. Some people exchanged discreet glances, while Raphael, a few meters away, watched everything without moving. There was no anger in the waiter's gaze, just a quiet sadness. He knew what it was like to be treated like someone invisible, and seeing his owner face it with dignity was something that filled him with pride. Augusto asked everyone to return to their seats. "No one needs to leave," he said, looking around. "No one will be humiliated here." Then he turned to Helena. "Mrs. Duarte, please sit down. Let's settle this like adults." She hesitated, looked around, and for the first time seemed embarrassed to be being watched. He sat down slowly, crossing his arms. Augusto sat down in front of her, asking Raphael to step away for a moment. "I understand that you're frustrated," the owner began, "but there's a line between complaining and attacking, and you crossed that line a few minutes ago." Helena snorted. "I only asked for justice." "Justice?" Augusto repeated. "Justice is righting a wrong. What you did was seek a platform." His words hit a nerve. Helena looked away, fiddling nervously with the strap of her bag. Augusto, noticing the change, lowered his "oh" tone. "Tell me honestly, is this all really about the bill, or about something you're trying to hide from yourself?" Helena looked up in surprise. "What are you talking about?" "That sometimes the problem isn't in the dish, but in what we carry inside," he said, touching his own chest. Her gaze trembled. For an instant, the elegant, firm woman gave way to someone fragile, but her pride returned, and she tried to pull herself together. "I have nothing to hide. I just don't think I should pay for something I didn't order." "Yes, you did order the reserve wine. I authorized the waiter to serve it when he came to confirm the order." The revelation took her by surprise. Helena looked at him confused. "Did you authorize it?" "Yes. Raphael told me that you asked, 'What's the best wine you have?' And he politely replied that it was the special reserve." She was silent, trying to remember, and suddenly her face turned pale. I did ask that," he murmured, his voice lower. "But I didn't realize he took it as a request." "He just did what he thought you wanted," Augusto said. "And it's funny. The world has this habit of giving us exactly what we ask for, even when we're not ready to receive it." The words seemed to pierce something inside her. Helena looked down, absently rummaging through her bag, until a small envelope fell to the floor. Augusto, by reflex, bent down to pick it up. When she looked, she noticed something that made her pale even more. It was a billing envelope from a treatment clinic. She quickly took it from his hands, embarrassed. "Sorry, it's none of your business." "I wasn't going to ask, Mrs. Duarte," he replied gently. "But perhaps that's the real reason for your irritation." Helena remained silent. Tears began to form, but she held them back. "I don't need pity." "It's not pity," Augusto replied. "It's understanding. Sometimes, when the pain is too great, it disguises itself as arrogance." She stared at him, surprised, as if someone had finally translated what she herself couldn't express. For a moment, the entire hall disappeared. There were only the two of them left, the man who saw beyond appearances and the woman who, for the first time, saw herself without a mask. Helena took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. "I shouldn't have shouted." "You shouldn't have, but the important thing is that you realized it," Augusto replied. "We all make mistakes. The difference lies in who has the courage to see it." She looked at the plate in front of her, now cold. "What if I want to fix this?" "Start by being kind to the person you hurt," he said, glancing discreetly at Raphael, who was watching from afar. Helena nodded slowly, discreetly wiping away a tear before standing up. For the first time, there was no more arrogance in her gaze, only regret. And without realizing it, in the middle of a simple complaint, she had exposed the secret she was trying to hide from herself, her own pain. Helena stood still for a few seconds, trying to piece together what remained of herself. The room had returned to a low murmur, but she still felt watched, stripped of all the authority she had pretended to possess. The envelope that had fallen from her bag seemed to weigh more than her own body, and each of Augusto's words echoed like a truth she had never wanted to admit. Raphael, who had been watching from a distance, slowly approached. His serene yet sympathetic face contrasted with the tension of the previous moment. He stopped a step away from the table and, in a calm voice, asked, "Ma'am, can I get you another glass of water?" She looked at him, and for the first time that night, she didn't see an employee. She saw a human being. The lump in her throat prevented her from responding immediately. She simply nodded. Raphael walked away and returned a few moments later, gently placing the glass on the table. "Is everything okay?" he asked, in such a respectful tone that it seemed impossible not to lose her composure in front of him. Helena tried to smile, but her voice was shaky. "No, it's not." Raphael hesitated, but remained. "If I can help in any way." "You've already helped," she interrupted, "just by treating me better than I treated you." The silence between the two was stronger than any excuse. Augusto watched the scene from a distance without intervening. He knew when the lesson was beginning to unfold on its own. Helena took a deep breath, trying to hold back her tears. She looked at Raphael and said in a low voice, "That envelope that you saw is from the clinic where my husband is hospitalized." Raphael kept his gaze gentle. "I understand." She shook her head, as if needing to release the weight she had carried for too long. "He's been battling addiction for 6 months, and I've been trying to keep everything in order, business, home, appearances, as if feigning control were the same as having strength." The words came out quickly, as if each one were a confession. "Today was the day the clinic called me saying he'd relapsed. I was furious, lost. I came in here wanting to forget for a while. When the bill came, I just needed something or someone to vent my feelings to." Raphael listened to her in silence without interrupting. "And the worst part," she continued with a bitter laugh, "is that I'm always telling people that no one should judge anyone. But look at me. I yelled at you, humiliated a professional who was just doing the right job." Raphael replied calmly, "Pain doesn't justify, but it explains. You're not the only one who takes out their feelings on those around them. I've done it myself at home with my mother." She looked up, surprised by his sincerity. "And what did you learn from that?" "That regret weighs less when we transform it into a request for forgiveness." The waiter's simple words sounded wiser than any advice. Helena raised her hand to her face, discreetly wiping away a tear. Augusto approached again, now with a softer expression. "You don't need to justify yourself, Helena. We all have days when the weight of life makes us feel unfair." She stared at him, surprised that he called her by name. "Do you know my name?" "It's in the reserve," he replied. "But now it's more than that. I wanted to remind you that behind the client there's a person." Helena lowered her gaze and murmured, "It's been a while since anyone called me that." Augusto placed his hand on the table in a calm gesture. "The restaurant will keep the bill, but on one condition." "Which one?" she asked, confused. "Come back here tomorrow. No makeup, no necklace, no guilt. Just come for dinner." She blinked in surprise. "Why?" "Because when respect is restored, food tastes like life again." Helena stood still for a few seconds, digesting the invitation. It was something simple, but it sounded like forgiveness. Raphael walked away slowly, leaving the two in silence. She looked at the cold plate, then at the glass of water, and finally at the envelope. He carefully put it in his bag and stood up. "I'll be back tomorrow, Mr. Augusto," he said, his voice firm but gentle. He nodded. "We'll be here." When she left, the rain had stopped, and a new air seemed to fill the restaurant. Raphael looked at his boss and asked in a low tone, "Do you think she'll really come back?" Augusto replied, looking at the door, "When someone faces their own truth, they always come back." The next night, the clock struck 8:20 when the door of the life opened again. This time no one turned to see who was arriving. But Augustus realized immediately. Era Helena Duarte, without the silk dress from the day before, without the pearl necklace, without the high heels that usually announced her arrival. She wore a simple coat, her hair tied up, and the look on her face was that of someone who had spent the day fighting something she couldn't explain. She hesitated before taking the first step, as if the ground still held the echoes of her previous embarrassment. The maitre d' recognized her and, without saying a word, just gave a slight nod, leading her to the same table as before. The hall was emptier. The sound of the piano was soft, and the atmosphere seemed to welcome the moment. When Raphael appeared beside her, the surprise was mutual and discreet. He smiled, lightly, without irony, without judgment. "Good evening, Mrs. Duarte." She took a deep breath and replied, "Just Helena, please." Raphael nodded, understanding the weight of that sentence. "Do you want the same as yesterday?" She looked at the menu for a few seconds, then closed it. "This time I just want a simple dish. Something light. We have a homemade vegetable soup." "Perfect." The waiter walked away, and Helena surveyed the room for a moment. The unfamiliar faces looked different from that perspective. It wasn't just people judging her anymore. It was just people. Each one with their own stories, pains, and temptations to explode at the wrong moment. While waiting Augustus he appeared. He had his hands in his pockets and a serene look in his eyes. "I'm glad you're back," he said, stopping beside the table. Helena looked at him shyly. "I almost didn't come." "Why?" "Because I'm still ashamed." Augusto smiled slightly. "Shame is a sign that regret is doing its job. Just don't let it hold you back. It's a visitor, not a dwelling place." Helena looked away, overcome with emotion. "It's strange. Yesterday I left here furious with the world. Today I feel at peace, even for no reason. Maybe the reason is simple," he replied. "Yesterday, you came to win an argument. Today, you came to find yourself again." She took a deep breath, trying to hold back her tears. The waiter returned with the soup, placed the plate in front of her, and left silently. The soft scent of vegetables and herbs filled the air. Helena tasted the first spoonful, and something as banal as that gesture seemed transformative. Hot, light, simple food, the opposite of what she usually ordered, but exactly what she needed. "You know, Mr. Augusto," she began, without looking up, "I spent so much time trying to control everything that I forgot how wonderful it is when someone simply understands what you need, without having to explain it." "That's what we call empathy, Helena," he said, and it arises when we stop looking at people as obstacles and start seeing them as mirrors. She watched him for a few seconds and asked with a half-smile, "Do you always speak like that, as if you were writing a book?" Augusto laughed softly. "No. I've only lived long enough to realize that the most difficult people are usually the ones who need affection the most." The words left him silent. For a moment, Helena just looked at her empty plate, thoughtful. Then, in a soft tone, he asked, "And Raphael?" "He's in the kitchen now, helping to close the hall. Can I talk to him before I go?" "Sure, I think he'll like that." A few minutes later, Raphael approached the table. Helena stood up, a little nervous. "Raphael, I wanted to apologize to you in person. Yesterday I treated you like you were invisible, but you were the only person who truly saw me." He smiled, simple and sincere. "You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I should," she replied. "Because yesterday I realized that what bothered me most wasn't the bill, it was the reflection. Your calm gaze showed me exactly who I didn't want to be." Raphael looked down, touched. "We all have bad days. But what matters is what we do the next day." Helena nodded, moved. "That's why I came back, to do things differently." They exchanged a silent, meaningful handshake, and in that instant, something changed. Not just for her, but for him as well. It was the kind of reconciliation that needed no witnesses. When Helena left, the cold night wind touched her face. The streetlights reflected off the wet sidewalks, and the distant noise of traffic mingled with the sound of her own heartbeat. She looked back, seeing the restaurant in the distance. I no longer saw an expensive place, I saw a turning point. As she walked, she whispered to herself, "Sometimes what we call shame is just the beginning of change." And for the first time in a long time, Helena Duarte felt like he was actually breathing. 3 days had passed since their reunion. Life continued its leisurely pace, amidst discreet laughter, the clinking of cutlery, and the serene sound of the piano. But that night, something seemed different. A light, almost hopeful mood hung in the air, though no one knew why. Just before closing, the door opened again, and the respectful silence returned instinctively. Era Helena Duarte. But this time he was carrying something in his arms, a small box wrapped in gold paper, with a simple bow. She walked up to the counter with sure steps, being greeted by the curious gaze of Raphael and by the discreet smile of Augustus. "Good evening," she said, her tone calm and firm. "I hope I'm not disturbing your end of the day." "Not at all," Augusto replied. "La Vida is always open to anyone who comes with a light heart." Helena laughed lightly. "So I'm finally allowed in," she said with gentle humor. "Not to complain, but to thank you." Raphael, who was organizing the cutlery, approached, not knowing exactly what to say. "You didn't need to bring anything." "I know," she replied, slowly opening the box. "But after what happened, I felt I needed to give back some of what I received. Here." Inside the box there was 3 small bottles of wine, not expensive, but elegant, with simple labels. And next to them, a white card with handwritten letters. "To the waiter who taught me patience, to the owner who taught me empathy, and for myself, who finally learned humility." The silence that followed was the kind that only exists when the heart understands what reason cannot translate. Raphael read the card twice, not knowing how to react. "I don't know what to say." Helena smiled. "No need. Sometimes, silence is the most beautiful form of gratitude." Augusto picked up one of the bottles and read the label. "Simple wine, but chosen with care," he said. "It perfectly matches the new phase of our home." Helena nodded. "I learned that simplicity is the luxury that arrogance will never understand." She turned to Raphael. "I wanted to ask you something." "Of course," he replied. "I want you, the next time a client like me comes in here and treats you badly, remember this story. And don't lose your cool, because maybe she's just trying to hide something that hurts too much to say." Raphael smiled, moved. "I promise." The moment was interrupted by a small group of customers who approached, curious. A gray-haired lady who was dining near the entrance said politely, I remember you. You were yelling here the other day, weren't you? Helena laughed, a little embarrassed. Yes, it was me. And now he's bringing gifts, the woman replied, smiling. Now that's a rare sight. Helena lowered her head humbly. I think that when we hurt someone, apologizing is the least we can do. But when someone forgives you, giving back is essential. The entire room seemed to listen. And, almost imperceptibly, the atmosphere changed. The customers began to smile, the waiters looked at each other, and even the pianist changed the melody to something softer, almost like an improvised soundtrack for that moment of reconciliation. Augusto looked at Helena and said, What happened here is rare. Most people prefer to erase mistakes, not face them. I tried, she replied. But the more I pretended nothing happened, the heavier I felt. It's because regret doesn't fade with time, Augusto added. It only changes form. Sometimes it turns into anger. Other times, silence. And when we're lucky, it turns into learning. Helena nodded, holding back tears. It took me 40 years to understand that. Raphael looked at her with admiration. The important thing is that you understand. There are people who go through their entire lives without realizing it. Before leaving, Helena approached the counter once more. I'll leave these bottles here in the corner. I want you to open one of them one day, when you feel the restaurant needs a reminder of its reason for being. Augusto placed his hand on the box, respectfully. You can be sure. I promise that when that day comes, we will toast not to the food, but to the people. Helena smiled and started walking towards the door. He stopped for a moment, looked back and said, Funny. Yesterday I left here feeling ashamed. Today I leave feeling grateful. Raphael replied with a slight smile. It's because sometimes to see the value of what we have, we first have to lose our pride. Helena agreed silently. And when the door closed behind her, the entire restaurant seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, as if everyone there had learned something, even without having been the protagonist. The next day dawned calmly in life. The smell of fresh coffee and warm bread filled the air, and soft morning light streamed in through the large windows of the dining room. But what really lingered there wasn't the aroma. It was the change and invisible feeling that something had changed since the night before. Raphael, when arranging the tables, noticed that everyone seemed lighter. The employees smiled naturally, the customers greeted each other more politely, and even the manager, who normally walked by in a hurry, stopped to thank the team for their work. In the middle of the routine, Augustus, he came in with the newspaper folded under his arm. He placed it on the counter and waved to Raphael. Look at this, he said, pointing to one of the inside pages. The printed title read, Customer who caused a scandal in a restaurant returns to apologize and moves the team. Raphael's eyes widened. Did they publish this? It seems someone was here that night and decided to tell the story, Augusto replied. And apparently the public got the message. Below the title, an excerpt from the article quoted Helena's speech. I learned that respect is worth more than any luxury. Raphael read in silence, feeling a shiver. That sentence summed up exactly what the life had become. A place where people didn't just go to eat. They went remember what really matters. At lunch, the movement doubled. Several people came not just for the food but for the history. A lady commented in the queue, I brought my daughter to visit the newspaper woman's restaurant. From the woman who changed. Completed another. Augusto watched everything from afar, smiling with the silent pride of someone who knows that the best kind of fame is that which is born of character. During the afternoon, he gathered the team. I want to propose something, he said as everyone approached. Starting today, every Friday, we'll have Momento la Vita. What would that be? Asked Clara, one of the waitresses. A moment before opening the dining room to remind us that we are serving people, not tables. Raphael smiled. I like that. Me too, Augusto added, because respect begins within us, and that's what the world is forgetting. About that, Helena Duarte read the article at home. With each line, I felt a mixture of shame and relief, not because of what people would think, but because she could finally look in the mirror without hating herself. He picked up the phone and called the clinic. The attendant's voice was calm but firm. "Mrs. Helena, your husband is fine. He agreed to start the new recovery program." She took a deep breath, feeling her heart ease. "That's great," he murmured. "Tell him I started mine too." He hung up and was silent for a few seconds. Then he opened his cell phone's notepad and wrote just one sentence. "The respect I demand from others begins with the forgiveness I give myself." Saved, as if marking the beginning of a new chapter. That same night, Helena discreetly returned to the life. He had brought no gifts or requests, just presents. Raphael saw her from afar and gave a slight wave with a simple smile. She replied with another, serene one. No words were spoken, but they both knew what that gesture meant. Mutual gratitude. Augusto, watching from the kitchen, commented to Pedro, "Funny, isn't it? A restaurant that started out serving food now serves humanity." Pedro laughed, agreeing. And all because someone once had the courage to complain. Augustus smiled. Sometimes order is born from chaos. Hours. Later, when the restaurant closed, Raphael turned off the lights and looked at the reflection of the street in the glass. He saw the street lights illuminating the wet sidewalks and thought about everything that had happened in the last few weeks. It didn't even seem like the same place, nor the same people. He leaned his forehead against the glass and said softly, "People come in hungry and leave fed, but it's not always food." He smiled slightly, turned off the last switch, and left, feeling that this place and this history still had much to teach. The following days were of intense movement in the life, but what was growing there wasn't just the number of customers, it was a different energy. Something in the air felt more human. People came in a hurry and left slowly. Some came back just to greet the waiters. Others asked to meet Augustus, the owner who everyone said had changed a customer with words, not punishment. The story of Helena Duarte had become a kind of modern fable. In the city, local newspapers, blogs, and even radio programs began to comment on the episode. But unlike passing controversies, this story did not divide opinions. Union. One day, a group of students entered the restaurant to deliver something to Augusto. It was a simple, hand-painted poster with blue letters. "Food and respect are served here." The owner looked at the poster and smiled, moved. "Where did you get that idea?" One of the young women replied, "It was our teacher. She showed the eye video and asked us to do a project on empathy. They said it all started here." Augusto was silent for a moment. It was rare to see kindness spread without the need for marketing, but that's exactly what was happening. The kindness was infecting. He hung the poster near the entrance, facing the street, and from that day on, every customer who walked in read those words before walking through the door. About that, Raphael, I lived the reflection of this change in my daily life. One afternoon, an impatient man called him abruptly, complaining about the delay in his order. The waiter took a deep breath and replied calmly, "I apologize, sir. We had a slight delay in the kitchen, but your dish is on its way." Before the customer could respond, another couple from a nearby table intervened. "The boy is doing his best, sir. No one here needs to be mistreated." The entire room was silent for a second, until the customer looked down and said, "You're right, I'm sorry." Raphael thanked him with a slight smile and continued his service. Deep down, he felt something different. As if without realizing it, he had become guardian of a new kind of respect. Later, Augusto called him into the office. "I saw what happened out there," he said, crossing his arms. "And I saw how you reacted." Raphael smiled modestly. "I only did what I learned from you." Augusto shook his head. "No, Raphael. You did what you learned from life. I just gave you a mirror to realize that." The two looked at each other in silence, and the owner continued, "I want to expand the Serve with Respect project, not just for employees but for customers as well. Little reminders on the tables, phrases on the packaging, so that everyone who comes here can take a little of this message out into the world." Raphael nodded excitedly. "It's going to be amazing." "Yes, it will," Augusto replied, "because kindness can also be served." At the end of that week, Helena returned once more. He entered discreetly, ordered a simple dessert, and watched the movement. He saw families laughing, couples talking, waiters being treated kindly. The restaurant that had once witnessed a scandal was now the scene of silent respect. Raphael recognized her and approached. "Good evening, Helena." "Good evening, Raphael. Everything okay today?" "Everything's perfect," she said, looking around. "You know, it's funny. I came here for the food and ended up being served by my conscience." Raphael laughed, and she added, "I see the way you work, and I keep thinking, if every place had a little bit of this, the world would be different. And maybe it starts just like that," he replied. "One restaurant at a time." On the way out, Helena passed the poster hanging at the entrance. He read the words slowly and smiled. "Food and respect are served here." She took her cell phone out of her bag and took a photo. Posted with the caption, "The flavor of life improves when we learn to season it with humility." In less than an hour, the post spread. People commented, shared, and tagged the restaurant. In just a few days, that simple phrase became a symbol. Augusto, seeing the movement online, just smiled and commented to Pedro, "The world is noisy, but respect still finds a way to be heard." And in that instant, he realized that La Vida was no longer just a restaurant. It was a starting point, a living reminder that a word spoken with empathy can travel further than any fancy dish. The wind that passed through the city streets no longer carried just the smell of restaurants. It carried stories. Stories of empathy, regret, and a woman who once complained about a bill, but ended up paying it with pride and receiving back respect. The life had become a symbol. The apology video of Helena Duarte, and the phrase written on the poster, "Food and respect are served here," circulated across networks, being shared by schools, companies, and even TV programs. But the most impressive thing wasn't the fame, but the silent impact that it started to cause. At a public school across town, an ethics teacher showed the video to her students. After it was over, a 12-year-old girl raised her hand and said, "I yelled at my mom yesterday. She just wanted to help me, and I treated her like that woman in the video." The teacher smiled, touched. "And what are you going to do now?" "I'll apologize," the girl replied sincerely. The whole class fell silent. A few days later, the school sent a letter to the restaurant, signed by dozens of students. "Thank you for showing that making mistakes is not the end. It's just the beginning of understanding others." Augusto read the letter while sitting in his office, and for a moment, his eyes filled with tears. It wasn't pride. It was gratitude. About that, Helena lived his own transformation. He stopped going to places where he needed to prove himself. He began volunteering at an institution that supported families of drug addicts, the same cause that had shaken his life months earlier. One Friday afternoon, while organizing donations, he heard one of the coordinators say, "You have a very calm way of dealing with people." Helena smiled. "It's just that I learned the hard way what impatience does to us." The coordinator laughed. "Then keep it up, because the world needs more people who speak softly and act big." Helena remained silent, but that sentence remained etched in her mind. No life. Raphael was waiting on a table when a man stood up, approached him, and asked, "Are you the waiter in the video?" Raphael was embarrassed. "It depends. Is the video about the confusion or the one about forgiveness?" The customer laughed. "I think it's both of them now. I came from another city just to see this place. I wanted to thank you." "Thank you?" Raphael asked, surprised. "Yes," the man replied. "I have a daughter who works as a waitress and always comes home crying because of rude customers. I showed her the video and said, 'See, there are still people who understand the value of what you do.'" Raphael was silent for a moment. Then he extended his hand and said, "Thank you for coming all this way. That's worth more than any tip." The customer shook his hand and they both smiled. Kindness had made another crossing. Over time, Augusto began to be invited to give lectures on respect in the workplace. At first, he was reluctant. He didn't see himself as a speaker. But when he realized the size of the message he carried, he accepted. In one of these lectures, in a university auditorium, he said something that stuck in the minds of those who listened. The difference between humiliating and teaching is the tone of voice, and sometimes the most profound lesson is spoken in silence. The applause came, discreet but sincere, just as was always his way. Helena, in turn, was invited to participate in an interview on a local radio station. When the presenter asked what she had learned, she replied, "Complaining is easy. What's difficult is having the courage to admit that the mistake is ours." He paused and added, "In that restaurant, I didn't just discover a mistake. I discovered the kind of person I no longer wanted to be." On the other side of the microphone, the presenter was silent. It was rare for someone to speak with such truth without becoming agitated. Back at the restaurant, Augusto and Raphael were talking after work. The old owner, sitting at the counter, looked at the illuminated sign outside. "See how far this has come, Raphael?" he asked. "It all started with a complaint, and it ended with a revolution," replied the waiter, smiling. Augusto shook his head. "No, my boy, it's not over yet. Stories of respect never end. They just change addresses." Outside, the wind blew hard, shaking the sign at the entrance. The words written on it seemed to come alive with movement. "Food and respect are served here." And somewhere far away, someone else was reading that sentence, perhaps at the right time to change too. The sun was, setting slowly, dyeing the sky orange and gold. The reflection of the late afternoon lights illuminated the windows of the life, which was now more than a restaurant. It was a refuge, a meeting point between stories, mistakes, and new beginnings. That night, Augustus was preparing something special. The restaurant had completed a year since the episode that changed everything, and he wanted to celebrate what really mattered: the people. The tables were decorated with simple flowers, and small notes rested beside the napkins. Each one said something different, but they all had the same essence. Kindness is the invisible spice that changes any recipe. As the hall filled, Raphael arranged the last chairs. It was then that the door opened, and the reverent silence returned, as it always did when the unexpected arrived. Era Helena Duarte. But this time she didn't come alone. Beside him walked a thin man with a tired face, but with a new sparkle in his eyes. She held him tightly, almost as if she were holding a promise. Raphael approached, surprised, but with a restrained smile. "Good evening, Helena," she replied tenderly. "Good evening, Raphael. This is Eduardo, my husband. He wanted to come with me." The waiter shook the man's hand, who looked embarrassed. "Welcome, sir." Eduardo looked around in amazement. "So this is the place that taught my wife to forgive me." Helena looked down, moved. "Actually, this is where I learned to forgive myself first." Augusto appeared soon after. Recognizing the couple from a distance, he approached with that same calm look as always. "Helena, what a joy to see you again." "And this time, with the reason for all this," she replied, looking at her husband. The owner smiled, placing his hand on Eduardo's shoulder. "Welcome to the house where even silence speaks." They sat at the same table where it all began. Helena ran her hand over the wooden top, remembering the night of the scandal, the harsh words, Augusto's firm gaze. But now, what wasn't shame. It was gratitude. Raphael brought the menu, but Helena smiled and said, "No need, Raphael. I want the same as before, the simple dish." He nodded, thrilled. "Homemade vegetable soup." "That's right," she replied. "Only now, in 2 portions." As they waited, Eduardo looked at his wife with admiration. "You talked so much about this place. I thought it was just a restaurant." "And isn't it?" asked Augusto, smiling. "Now I see that it isn't," he replied. "It's a mirror." Silence fell for a moment. Helena took a deep breath. "I needed to show you where everything started to change. This was the first place someone made me realize that pride doesn't feed anyone." Eduardo held her hand, and the gesture was enough for all the unspoken words to become forgiveness. The soup has arrived, simple, steaming, fragrant. The first sip was almost ceremonial. Helena closed her eyes, savoring the moment with the serenity of someone who had already experienced the worst flavor of life, and now rediscovered the pleasure of the essential. Augusto watched from afar. Raphael standing next to the counter too. There was something deeply symbolic about that reunion. Food had fulfilled its true role, uniting what pride had separated. After dinner, Helena got up and walked to Augusto. She took a small envelope out of her bag and handed it to him. "I want you to read it when you are alone." He accepted, surprised. "Can I at least know what it is?" A way of saying thank you. Not for the forgiveness, but for the lesson. She and her husband said goodbye with sincere hugs. And as they walked out the door, a light feeling filled the air, as if the cycle had finally come full circle. Hours later, with the restaurant empty, Augusto opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. He began to read. "Mr. Augusto, the day I walked into your restaurant, I felt like the world owed me something. But it was there that I discovered that I owed the world something. Humility, patience, and respect. Today, my husband is recovering, and so do I. You didn't serve me food. He gave me a mirror." Augusto smiled, his eyes filled with tears. He put the letter in his jacket pocket and turned off the lights. Before leaving, he looked at the sign outside. The reflection of the glass brought back to him the brightness of the words that had changed everything. "Food and respect are served here," he whispered. "And that's how we feed the world." He left silently as the night wind carried. The scent of the restaurant through the streets. The scent of a new chance. That same night, after Augustus kept the letter from Helena in his pocket, he turned off the restaurant lights one by one. The sound of the switch breaking the silence seemed to mark the end of a cycle. But inside him, something told him that the story didn't end there. Because what had been served in the life was never limited to food. It was something invisible but deeply nourishing. Redemption. The old owner went out onto the sidewalk and looked at the illuminated sign. The words reflected on the glass wet from the fine rain. "Food and respect are served here." For a moment, Augusto thought about everything that had happened since that first night. The scandal, the anger, the silence, the forgiveness. And he realized that every gesture, every word, had been part of a recipe that he never planned, but that destiny insisted on cooking in front of everyone. A few days later, the restaurant returned to its usual rhythm. Customers came and went, waiters smiled, dishes came and went. But in every detail there was a new care, an invisible seasoning of humanity. In the kitchen, Raphael was preparing for his shift when he found the envelope that Helena had left for him the week before. He opened it, curious. Inside was a small sheet of paper with firm writing. "Raphael, I yelled at you when what I really wanted was for someone to hear me. You were patient when I was cruel. Thank you for showing me that dignity. Is not learned from books. It is learned in silence." He read silently, taking a deep breath. She put the note in her apron pocket and returned to work with a light heart. At night, Helena and Eduardo returned to life discreetly. This time there was no letter, no gift, no symbolism. There were only two regular customers, a couple who talked quietly, smiled, and ate together. But for those who knew what they had been through, that was the most powerful scene of all. When they finished, Raphael brought the bill to the table as always. Helena looked at the paper, smiled, and said, "I never thought I would be happy to see a bill one day." Raphael laughed, surprised. "And the reason?" "Because now I know the real value of what's written here," she replied. "It's not the price of food, it's the price of moving." Eduardo looked at the waiter and added, "And that, my friend, is the only price worth paying." They paid the bill, thanked us, and left, leaving only the gentle aroma of something that cannot be sold. Peace. Augusto, watching from the window, saw the couple walking away down the sidewalk. The wind swayed the trees, and the streetlights reflected off the rain puddles, creating a glow that looked like life pulsing through the ground. He turned to Raphael and said, "Funny. Before I thought the best part of serving was seeing the customer satisfied." Raphael looked at him curiously. "And now I think it's like seeing someone come in here angry and leave with a clean heart." The two were silent for a moment, looking at the empty room, lit only by the soft light of the candles on the tables. It was as if the restaurant itself was breathing, as if every brick, Every piece of cutlery and every plate carried a little of Helena's story, a living reminder that no one is defined by the worst day of their life. That night, before closing the door, Augusto walked to the counter and opened the reservation book. On the last page, he wrote something he knew would stay there forever. Respect is the only dish that never goes out of style. He closed the book, turned off the lights, and walked out into the cold night. Outside, the city was still alive, hurried, noisy, full of people who perhaps hadn't yet learned the taste of humility, but he knew that somewhere that story would continue to be told, maybe by a waiter, by a teacher, or by someone who simply decided treat others better. The life remained there, firm, silent, and full of stories that no longer needed to be told, just felt. Respect is not demanded, it is earned. Forgiveness is not asked for, it is offered. And true change happens when humility finally sits at the table,